They weren't happy about, they weren't exposing what the government was doing. Of course, the picture was banned in South Africa.
Behind every major event in history, there's a photo that tells the real story, and it's almost never the one they show you. From a mother who forced America to look inside a coffin, to a man with shopping bags who stopped a line of tanks, to a machine that swore your skull could reveal your personality. These banned photos will destroy what you thought about history. Stay locked in. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Number 20. Burned Iraqi soldier. The burned body leaning out of this truck came from the very end of the Gulf War. Photographer Kenneth Ghraib took the shot on February 28, 1991, just hours before the ceasefire. It was on Highway 80, the stretch north out of Kuwait, that reporters quickly called the Highway of Death. The man had been inside a truck hit during the Allied strikes on February 26th and 27th. He tried to crawl free as the fire spread, but never made it. Ghraib's frame cut straight through the idea of a clean surgical war, but American outlets refused to run it.
President Bush said today he is now turning his attention to peace in the Middle East, and he wants to move fast.
The Associated Press pulled it. Time magazine said no, and Life magazine said no. Instead, it appeared overseas in The Observer in Britain and Libération in France. The retreat itself left a nightmare scene. Highway 80 and nearby Highway 8 were choked with about 1,400 to 2,000 wrecked or abandoned vehicles across nearly 37 miles.
The Iraqis panicked, creating a massive traffic jam. They were hit where they stood.
Reporters who later walked that road noted how heavily U.S. coverage downplayed the reality. What stayed with Ghraib was the humanity. He said the man was still fighting to save his life to the very end. That's why the photo remains one of the most unfiltered views of that war. Number 19. Hector Pieterson. On June 16, 1976, thousands of black students in Soweto took to the streets to protest a new law that forced Afrikaans in their schools.
Now stop! Stop right there!
What began as a peaceful march exploded when police opened fire with tear gas and then live rounds.
Soweto was on fire. No journalist was sleeping on that night until the following day.
In the chaos, 12-year-old Hector Pieterson was shot. Photographer Sam Nzima captured the moment a teenager, Mbuyisa Makubo, picked up Hector's body and ran, while Hector's sister, Antoinette Sithole, screamed beside them.
While waiting for these other students, all of a sudden, there was a shock.
The image was printed the next day in the World newspaper and spread across the globe. The South African government tried to bury it. Nzima was harassed by police and forced back to his rural hometown, where he lived under constant watch. Mbuyisa, the young man carrying Hector, was also targeted and fled the country. His trail vanished in Nigeria in 1979, and he was never seen again. The Soweto uprising left at least 176 dead, though some reports put the toll far higher. Today, June 16th is remembered in South Africa as Youth Day. In 2002, a museum and memorial opened only 2 blocks from where Hector fell. Number 18. Emmett Till's open casket. Emmett Till was only 14 when his murder forced the country to confront the reality of racism. On August 28, 1955, he was kidnapped near Money, Mississippi. Just a few days later, his body was pulled from the Tallahatchie River. A cotton gin fan weighing around 70 to 75 pounds had been tied to his neck with barbed wire. His mother, Mamie Till Bradley, later Mamie Till Mobley, insisted on bringing him back to Chicago. She made the choice that changed everything. Let the people see what I've seen.
She was willing to go anywhere at any time and speak to anybody to tell the story.
From September 3rd through September 6, 1955, an open casket funeral was held at Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ. Tens of thousands of people came to view his body.
I thought that pretty soon the crowd would die down. It looked like all of Chicago was there.
The most famous photograph, taken by David Jackson, was published by Jet magazine on September 15th. It spread across the nation, destroying the lie that this was a local matter. The crowds outside Robert's Temple and the brutal photo together lit a fire that fueled the civil rights movement. Emmett was buried at Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois. Decades later, his original glass-topped casket was preserved by the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. In 2023, Robert's Temple was added to the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument. The photo still stands as one of the most powerful ever published, not for shock, but because a mother forced the world to look.
If it can further the cause of freedom, then I will say that he died a hero.
Number 17. My Lai Massacre. On March 16, 1968, U.S. Army Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry, Americal Division, entered the Sun Mai Village area, known to soldiers as My Lai 4 and My Ki 4. By the time they left, hundreds of unarmed civilians had been killed. Estimates range from 347 to 504. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr. and his helicopter crew landed in the chaos, put themselves between soldiers and villagers, and airlifted survivors out. Combat photographer Ronald L. Haberly shot what happened next. He used Army-issued black and white cameras, but he also had his own color camera, and that film made all the difference. He kept it, and when he later released it, the truth could no longer be hidden. On November 20th, 1969, the Cleveland Plain Dealer published the color images. Life magazine followed on December 5th. The photos shredded the claim that this had been a battle with the Viet Cong and pushed the Army into the Pierce investigation. In the end, only Lieutenant William Calley was convicted. One image went even further. In 1969, artists Irving Petlin, John Hendricks, and Fraser Dougherty used Haberly's color photo for a poster that asked, "And babies?" The line came from a CBS interview with soldier Paul Medlow. 50,000 copies were printed despite pushback, making the massacre impossible to ignore. Number 16. Katyn Massacre Exhumations. In the spring of 1943, German troops near Smolensk uncovered mass graves in the Katyn forest. To show what they had found, they brought in an international Katyn commission, made up of 12 forensic experts from neutral and occupied countries. Over weeks of digging, more than 4,000 bodies were unearthed. Doctors recorded bound hands, intact uniforms, diaries, and letters dated spring 1940, and single gunshot wounds to the back of the head. Out of 4,143 bodies exhumed, 2,815 were identified by name using paybooks, letters, and identification papers. Germany blasted the findings as proof of a Soviet crime. Poland's government in exile demanded the Red Cross investigate, and Stalin immediately cut ties with them. When the Red Army retook the area, Moscow staged its own inquiry and pinned the massacre on Germany. That story was enforced for decades. The truth only surfaced officially in 1990, when Mikhail Gorbachev admitted the Soviet NKVD secret police had ordered the killings and handed documents to Poland. In 2010, Russia's parliament finally confirmed that Stalin and his officials were responsible. Historians now put the total victims of Katyn and related sites at about 21,857. The exhumation photos from 1943 marked the first time the cover-up began to crack. Number 15. Abu Ghraib Prison Abuse.
It's a very clear-cut case of torture in prison under the military occupation by the US.
In November of 2003, inside Abu Ghraib prison near Baghdad, a detainee was made to stand barefoot on a cardboard box with wires taped to his hands and a black hood over his head. Guards told him that if he slipped, he would be electrocuted. Specialist Sabrina Harmon took the photo on November 4th, showing him with arms stretched out like a crucifix. Other frames showed Staff Sergeant Ivan "Chip" Frederick nearby. The prisoner's name was disputed. For years, survivor Ali Shalal al-Qaizi said it was him.
I was standing on the box. It's so strong, not breakable. They tied wires and started electric shocks.
Later, Army records pointed to Abdu Hussein Saad Faleh, nicknamed Gilligan. Whoever it was, the abuse was real and part of a larger system of mistreatment inside Abu Ghraib. The world first saw the image on April 28, 2004, when CBS aired it on 60 Minutes 2. A few days later, The New Yorker ran Seymour Hersh's investigation with more photos, drawing on Major General Antonio Taguba's secret report. Courts-martial followed. Charles Grainer was sentenced to 10 years, Lindy England to 3 years, and Sabrina Harmon to 6 months with a bad conduct discharge. The Pentagon described it as the work of a few bad apples, but Senate investigators later tied the abuse to failures higher up. Out of all the photos, this one became the icon, simple, haunting, and impossible to forget. Number 14. Tank Man. One man carrying shopping bags stood in front of a column of Chinese tanks in Beijing on June 5, 1989. It happened on Chang'an Avenue, just east of Tiananmen Square, the morning after troops used force to clear the protests. The image most people know came from Jeff Widener of the Associated Press, shooting from the Beijing hotel with a long lens.
It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the Avenue of Eternal Peace, which, as it happened, was already occupied.
Stuart Franklin of Magnum and Charlie Cole of Newsweek caught it from other angles. Cole's photo went on to win World Press Photo of the Year. To this day, the man's identity and fate are unknown. The photos almost didn't survive. Widener had been injured the night before, but with help from an American student, he got into the hotel and shot from a balcony. A friend smuggled his film to the AP office, where it was sent worldwide. Cole hid his own film in a toilet tank to stop police from seizing it. Without those risks, the world might never have seen the moment. Inside China, the image remains erased. State media never show it, and searches for Tank Man are blocked or scrubbed. In 2021, even Microsoft's Bing briefly filtered it worldwide, explained later as human error.
Many were civilians who went into the street unarmed to challenge the military and were mowed down by machine gun fire or run over by tanks.
Decades later, the fact that seeing this picture is still restricted shows how powerful it remains. Number 13. Flag-draped coffin. On April 7, 2004, a civilian cargo worker named Tammy Silico snapped a photo inside a plane in Kuwait. It showed about 20 flag-draped transfer cases prepared for the flight back to the United States.
The flag-draped caskets of American soldiers are a stark reminder of the high cost of freedom.
The Seattle Times published it on April 18th, and within days, Silico and her husband, David Landry, were fired by their employer, Maytag Aircraft, for breaking company and Defense Department rules. The reaction was explosive because of what the image represented. Since 1991, the Pentagon had enforced a ban on media photos of returning war dead at Dover Air Force Base and other entry points.
The new policy will allow journalists to photograph the caskets of fallen soldiers, arriving at Dover Air Force Base in the eastern state of Delaware.
Officials said it protected family privacy, but it also kept the public from seeing the cost of war. Silicio's photo came out as casualties in Iraq were climbing, and it reignited the fight over the Dover ban. At the same time, writer Russ Kick won a Freedom of Information Act appeal and posted 361 official photos from Dover, most showing rows of flag-draped cases moving through the base. The Pentagon clamped down again, but the release and Silicio's shot forced the issue into the open. By February 2009, Defense Secretary Robert Gates changed the policy. Media could cover dignified transfers at Dover if families consented, a major reversal after 18 years. Number 12. Man versus Ocean. Hoon Lim was only 24 when his world flipped upside down in World War II. On November 23, 1942, a German U-boat torpedoed the British freighter SS Ben Lomond about 250 miles off Brazil. Out of 54 people on board, 53 died. Hoon was the only one left alive, floating on an 8-foot wooden raft. The raft carried a small stash, about 12 gallons of water, 6 boxes of hardtack, 2 pounds of chocolate, 10 cans of pemmican, 5 cans of evaporated milk, a bottle of lime juice, massage oil, some flares, smoke pots, and a flashlight. He made it last by building his own tools. Using the flashlight spring and a nail, he shaped a hook, pulled line from old rope, and used crushed biscuits for bait. He started catching tiny fish, then bigger ones. He even trapped gulls, dried the meat in the sun, and salted it with seawater. When a shark tried to flop onto the raft, he fought it off with a water jug, killed it, and used it for food and liquid. To fight the heat, he turned his life jacket canvas into both a shade and a rain catcher. And since he couldn't swim well, he tied a rope to his wrist so he wouldn't slip off and drown. For 133 brutal days, he drifted about 750 miles across the ocean. On April 5, 1943, 3 Brazilian fishermen spotted him just 10 miles from the coast near Salinopolis. He had dropped 20 pounds but survived, the longest solo life raft survival ever recorded. That same year, King George VI awarded him the British Empire Medal. Number 11. Queen of the Mist. Annie Edson. Taylor was 63 when she pulled off something no one had ever done. She went over Niagara Falls and lived.
Survived a plunge over Niagara Falls more than 100 years ago. Never got the fame and fortune she was hoping for.
On October 24, 1901, her own birthday, she climbed into a barrel she had designed herself. It was built from oak, wrapped with iron hoops, and padded inside with a mattress and a leather harness. Her helpers pumped in air with a bicycle pump, sealed the hole with a cork, and strapped a 200-pound anvil to the bottom to keep it upright. The barrel measured about 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. She was towed into the river above Horseshoe Falls. The rope was cut, and the current carried her straight to the edge. The drop was around 160 feet. In less than 20 minutes, she had gone over the brink and been pulled back to shore. Rescuers opened the barrel and found her shaken, bleeding from a small scalp cut, but with no broken bones. Annie believed the stunt would bring fame and fortune. Instead, her manager stole the barrel, bookings disappeared, and her final years were spent in poverty. She died in 1921 at 82 and was buried in Oakwood Cemetery in the Stunter's Rest section beside other Niagara daredevils. She wasn't a showman or a thrill-seeker. She was a school teacher who calculated the odds, built her own plan, and survived one of the most dangerous drops on Earth. Number 10. Pilot captured. Dewey Wayne Waddell was an American pilot flying an F-105 Thunder Chief in 1967 when his mission ended in capture. On July 5th, his jet was hit by anti-aircraft fire over North Vietnam. He ejected, landed in a rice field, and was immediately seized. A few days later, his captors paraded him back out in his flight suit for propaganda. An East German crew filmed the scene for a series called Pilots in Pajamas. The whole thing was staged for propaganda. His captors put a small militia woman beside him with a bayonet to make the tall American pilot look weak and unheroic. But he knew exactly what he was doing. He looked straight at the camera. That glance was a message meant for home, and it worked. When the footage aired in early 1968, American monitors spotted him, pulled still frames, and the Air Force officially changed his status from missing in action to prisoner of war. Waddell would spend 5 years, 8 months, and 10 days in prison camps, including Hoa Lo, which Americans called the Hanoi Hilton. Conditions were brutal, but he endured until his release on March 4, 1973, during Operation Homecoming. Number 9. Tiny killer tank. Don't be fooled by these tiny tanks. They weren't really tanks at all. These were Germany's Goliaths, remote-controlled demolition carts from World War II.
The Goliath's Sonderkraftfahrzeug special-purpose vehicle was simply too ambitious for the era's technology.
In plain terms, they were one-use bombs on tracks. Each Goliath carried about 220 pounds of explosives, yet the machines themselves were shockingly small, just under 5 feet long, less than 3 feet wide, and about 2 feet tall. The armor was only 1/5 of an inch thick, barely enough to stop debris. They crawled forward at only about 3.5 miles per hour, guided by a joystick through a control cable more than 2,000 feet long. Between 1942 and 1944, Germany built around 7,500 of these machines.
To begin the development of a similar tracked remote-controlled vehicle immediately.
In combat, engineers rolled them toward tanks, bunkers, or bridges, and then detonated them. You'd find them at Anzio in 1944, in the Warsaw Uprising, and in Normandy. On paper, they looked clever, but in practice, the ground clearance was only 4.5 inches. The cable could be cut easily, and the machines were painfully slow. Many never made it to their targets. Allied soldiers nicknamed them Beetle tanks. The few survivors left today sit in museums like Bovington, Duxford, and Utah Beach. Number 8. Not a bootlegger. The banner tied to that car reading, "I'm not a bootlegger, don't shoot, I'll stop," was deadly serious. This was 1929, at the height of Prohibition, when being mistaken for a bootlegger, someone smuggling illegal liquor, could get you killed. Prohibition had started nationwide in 1920 after Congress passed the Volstead Act to enforce the 18th Amendment. Federal prohibition agents and local police routinely stopped cars, often with guns drawn. The risk was real. Dry agents fired on fleeing cars, and innocent motorists were caught in the chaos. Legal studies and newspaper reports from the Detroit-Toledo corridor and other hotspots describe cases where people were shot simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. One case that sparked outrage was Winston Titus, an 18-year-old Vermonter who was gunned down by a border agent while running beer over the Canadian line. Incidents like that showed just how dangerous the roads could be for anyone suspected of hauling liquor. By the early 1930s, the violence, corruption, and widespread failure of the ban fueled public anger. That momentum led to the 21st Amendment, which repealed Prohibition in 1933. The warning banner wasn't a joke or a stunt, it was a survival tactic. Ordinary drivers wanted to make it crystal clear. They weren't smugglers, just trying to get home alive. Number 7. Deadly fire gear. This photo of men standing proudly in shiny silver suits looks almost like a sci-fi movie scene, but it was deadly real. On October 14, 1940, the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm showed off asbestos firefighting suits. The goal was simple and terrifying. Rush into a burning plane, drag the pilot out, and somehow he lived through the flames. The suits were woven from asbestos, a mineral that doesn't burn. Back then, it seemed like the perfect fix for aircraft fire rescues. The image, snapped in Britain by photographer William Vanderson, shows just how confident they were in the idea. The part nobody thought about was the danger you couldn't see. Asbestos releases invisible fibers, and when you breathe them in, the damage doesn't show up for decades. But the result can be brutal. Asbestosis, lung cancer, or mesothelioma. Britain banned blue and brown asbestos in 1985 and banned all types by 1999. But the exposure had already happened, and even now, Britain still sees roughly 5,000 asbestos-related deaths every single year. Modern firefighting suits don't touch asbestos. Instead, they use aluminized outer shells that bounce heat away. Different suits are built for different levels of danger. Basic approach suits handle around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, proximity suits handle around 500, and full entry suits can survive brief bursts of up to 2,000 degrees.
And after the fire is out, there's another ambulance job getting the asbestos men out of their suits.
The job hasn't changed. Get close to flames and save lives, but at least the suits no longer hide a deadly risk in their fabric. Number 6. Airship flip. This wild shot of a giant airship standing almost straight up? Yeah, that's no trick. It was the U.S. Navy's USS Los Angeles caught at Lakehurst, New Jersey on August 25, 1927, around 1:30 in the afternoon. The tail was tied to a tall mast when a sudden gust slammed into it. The back end shot up into a cooler air pocket. The lift went crazy, and the whole ship tilted to about an 85-degree angle. Inside, crew members rushed forward along the keel, trying to move the weight, but it didn't matter. The airship just stood there on its nose, like some massive balloon trick, then slowly eased back down. No fire, no explosion, only small damage. Believe it or not, it was flying again the very next day. This thing was huge. It stretched 658 feet long, longer than a football field and a half, and 90 feet across.
And it was by far the largest vehicle which ever had been in the air.
Its helium gas volume was about 2.6 million cubic feet. The top speed hit between 75 and 80 miles per hour. It was first built in Germany as LZ-126, delivered to the U.S. in 1924, then filled with helium instead of hydrogen to keep it safer. Over its lifetime, it traveled more than 172,000 nautical miles before finally being retired. Number 5. Fake science. This bizarre-looking head cage was the psychograph, a phrenology machine from the early 1900s. Built to look high-tech, it was supposed to read your mind through the bumps on your skull. The model shown here was photographed in 1931 by Harris and Ewing in Washington, D.C., and the Library of Congress still has the original glass negative.
Believe it or not, it wasn't until the late 1930s that people gave up on this form of medical quackery.
The idea behind it was bold. The headpiece had 32 little spring-loaded probes that pressed into different spots on your skull. After measuring your head, the machine would spit out a card rating your personality traits on a scale from 1, meaning deficient, to 5, meaning very superior. It was invented by Henry C. Lavery of Wisconsin, who patented the first version in 1905. By 1929, he joined up with Frank P. White to launch the Psychograph Company in Minneapolis. These machines were installed in theaters and department stores, sold as coin-operated novelties. Some models were so complicated that they contained as many as 2,000 moving parts. The problem? It was junk science, and worse, a racist tool. Phrenologists leaned on measurements to prove that some races were born inferior, giving fake cover to slavery, segregation, colonial rule, and eugenics. By the time gadgets like this hit storefronts, the whole idea that skull bumps reveal your mind had already been torn down. And in 2018, researchers went even further, using more than 5,700 MRI scans to double-check. They found zero connection between head shape and behavior. The psychograph never worked, but the polished look and printed results made it seem legitimate. Number 4. Wrench hands. This bulky suit came from Republic Aviation in 1960, years before NASA had perfected its Apollo gear. Designed as a prototype for moonwalks, it looked more like a walking boiler than a space suit. It had its own oxygen supply, tripod-style legs so the wearer could perch between jobs, and stiff wrench hands meant to grip tools and tighten hardware. Engineers even suggested astronauts could eat inside it, treating the whole thing like a tiny personal spaceship. On paper, it looked futuristic, but in practice it failed. The rigid shell limited movement, and the clamp-like hands made it impossible to handle delicate work. NASA quickly realized astronauts needed more flexibility and better touch. That's why they went with pressure suits, like the Apollo A7L. Those suits used gloves reinforced with chromal R fabric for durability and silicone fingertips for feel. With that setup, astronauts could collect rocks, adjust cameras, and turn wrenches on the moon without being stuck inside a metal can with claw arms. Number 3. Spy bird. A camera pigeon might sound like a punchline, but it was a real invention that actually worked. In 1907, a German apothecary named Julius Neubronner strapped a tiny camera to homing pigeons using a light harness and an automatic timer. He used pigeons to rush prescriptions and wanted to see the routes they actually flew, especially after one bird vanished and wandered back weeks later. At first, the patent office laughed it off and refused him, but Neubronner proved it. He released pigeons, collected the cameras when they returned, and showed real aerial shots. In December 1908, the patent was approved. The gear was small but smart. Neubronner trained pigeons to carry between a little over 1 ounce and about 3 ounces. The cameras used pneumatic timers that snapped a photo during flight. He would take a bird up to 60 miles from its home, clip on the rig, and let it go. Most flights stayed between 160 and 330 feet above the ground. Some cameras even had 2 lenses, one facing forward and one backward, or panoramic designs for wider views. Neubronner unveiled the system at the 1909 Dresden International Photographic Exhibition, selling postcards of pigeon-shot views. He won prizes again at the 1910 and 1911 Paris Air Shows. When World War I came, armies briefly tried out pigeons for reconnaissance, but once airplanes took over, the bird cameras faded out. Still, Neubronner's pigeon cameras and photos are preserved today in German museums. Decades later, the CIA even built its own pigeon camera with batteries, though most of that project is still secret. Number 2. 1956 storage. What looks like a giant fridge being loaded into a Pan Am aircraft was actually the future of data in 1956. This was IBM's very first hard disk drive, the IBM 350, part of the IBM 305 Ramax system. The disk cabinet stood about 5 feet high, 6 feet wide, and weighed over a ton. It even needed a separate air compressor just to operate. Inside were 50 aluminum disks, each 2 feet across, spinning at 1,200 revolutions per minute. The total storage was 5 million 6-bit characters. Translated into today's standard 8-bit bytes, that's about 3.75 megabytes. The aerial density was roughly 2,000 bits per square inch. This machine wasn't something you bought. Companies leased it for about $750 a month, mostly for real-time accounting and inventory. The very first customer was Zellerbach Paper in San Francisco. IBM's publicity photos showed the massive drive being hauled by a forklift and loaded into a Pan American plane, exactly like in this shot. Number 1. World War I shells. This mountain of artillery shells stacked like firewood was not staged. That was the brutal reality of the Western Front. Before the Battle of the Somme began on July 1, 1916, the British Army fired more than 1.5 million shells in a single 7-day barrage. Most were 18-pounder rounds, about 3.3 inches across, and 4.5-inch howitzer shells. By September that year, photos from Fricourt showed endless piles of empty casings stacked higher than a man. Here's the shocking part. As many as 30% of those shells didn't even work. Production was rushed, fuses often failed, and too many shells were filled with shrapnel. Great for hitting troops in the open, but useless against deep German bunkers. So when the barrage ended, German machine gunners climbed out of their shelters and mowed down advancing troops. On day 1 alone, British losses hit 57,000 men, with more than 19,240 killed. Over the 141 days of fighting, the front moved less than 7 miles. The reason there were so many shells by mid-1916 goes back to the shell crisis of 1915. To fix it, Britain created a Ministry of Munitions and cranked up production to insane levels. Weekly heavy shell output became 22 times higher than it had been in 1914 and eventually 94 times higher. Railways hauled thousands of tons forward, and dumps like this one became a common sight at the front. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.